finally, tonight we are joined by Andrew L. Urban, author of many, many wonderful books, including a work he co-authored with Chris McLeod titled Zelensky, the Unlikely Hero, and also Volodymyr Zelensky, the Frontline President, both of which you can pick up from the Wilkinson Publishing Group. Andrew, welcome to Spectator TV.
Thank you, Alexandra. Lovely to be here.
Andrew, it will not have escaped your notice, and I'm sure that even among conservative circles there is a surprising amount of hostility and suspicion directed toward Ukraine and its leader Zelensky. Now, I've even heard elected politicians utter worrying commentary along the lines of Ukraine really belongs to Russia and that corruption of their political class is suitably punished by the destruction of their nation entirely. Now, given this, I thought it might be a good idea to bring you on for some, regional history. Andrew, you wrote this year in the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the 10th anniversary of Russia's annexation of Crimea, and the 30th anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum. Now, that last one is critical. Can you explain why the Budapest Memorandum is so critical in what's happening in the regional conflict of Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, the Budapest Memorandum was signed on December 5, 1994, in Budapest, of course, and it was an agreement by the US, UK, Russia, they're the key signatories, which guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty and protection of sovereignty in exchange for Ukraine handing over the third largest nuclear stockpile in the world to Russia, which now looks ridiculous, but at the time it seemed to make sense. It was handed over for breaking up and dispersing. Now, the 6 points in the memorandum effectively assured Ukraine that its sovereignty would be respected. It says, for example, that it would respect the signatories' independence and sovereignty in the existing borders. That was the first point. The second point, that it was refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of the signatories. The third point said that the signatories would refrain from economic coercion designed to subordinate to their own interest. Then the next point was to seek immediate Security Council action to provide assistance to the signatory if they should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. Now, on that point, we all remember Putin's threat of use of nuclear weapons, and then not to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon state treaties such as Ukraine. And finally, to consult with one another if questions arise regarding these commitments. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it's pretty clear why so many people, but apparently not the US and the UK, are concerned about the fact it's being breached by Russia.
Well, it's quite a leap of faith to sign a document like that. Ukraine, like other nations that live around the expansionist force of Russia, were right to live in fear. The dream of recreating the USSR never really died entirely, especially not in the mind of leaders like Putin that, see forcibly retaking the empire as part of a crucial personal development and vanity for themselves. Now, the history of this conflict is far too expansive to get into in this short interview. So I will ask instead, Andrew, was Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, as I said, a leap of faith in the modern belief of peace? And if so, was it foolish for them to place their trust in diplomacy and the promises that were written on paper instead of physical military force, which, as we know, has historically been used to keep peace in regions like this?
Yes, well, look, I mean, in fact, the agreement came about because they wanted Ukraine to be part of the non-proliferation regime, which was being negotiated at the time. And in fact, America, Bill Clinton was president, and his administration was really concerned about giving these assurances, and they kept watering it down before it was signed to its current state. But even in its current state, it is as we've seen in the annexation of Crimea, it was sufficiently robust to prompt the G8 to suspend Russia's membership of the G8 and to cancel that year's G8 summit in Sochi in June in Russia. So they took it pretty seriously. So there's no argument that it has no validity or no force or no legality. That's not true. Firstly. Secondly, it's not the only agreement that Russia has breached in its invasion of Ukraine. So it doesn't matter what it said. The undertaking was made by Russia, not by Putin. Of course, he wasn't president at the time. So yes, in a sense, what you're saying is, were they a bit naive? Well, they didn't really have much choice, and I don't think they expected that a memorandum like that, which was signed by major powers, would possibly be breached. Of course, that won't happen again, because we know that it's not what the paper it's written on.
It is actually interesting, a part of a wider conversation, because the world has been, we'll say, vaguely at peace for a while now, and so much of our international agreements are held on paper. Whereas if we go back through most of human history, national security and peace, and even victory, were all underpinned by defence, physical superior defence forces. Now, I understand this offends modern sensibilities, particularly in the Greens, who firmly believe that you can hug it out with a communist empire. But civilizations only appear to understand each other through war. Now, on that note, if Trump had won a second term in the White House, do you think that Russia would have made a move on Ukraine? After all, he has shown a willingness to defend assets and allies in the Middle East previously. So maybe the question about what would have happened if Russia had breached this memorandum if Trump was in power is a little more murky than with Biden.
Yeah, look, as we know, Trump has boasted that he would end that war within a couple of days. Now, your question is whether would Russia have invaded Ukraine if Trump was in the White House. I don't believe he would have. I believe that whether Trump would invoke the Budapest referendum or not, he would not have, sat idly by. I mean, he certainly wouldn't have said what Biden said. Well, it depends how serious the incursion is. Like that's not Trump talk. So I think on the one hand, I don't think Putin would have dared. Meaning, he just wouldn't. He wouldn't trust Trump to do what was expected, which wasn't known. And Trump's supposed friendship with Putin would have also come into play. If, for example, Trump were to become the president, what he said he would do is that he would ring Vladimir and say, listen, if you don't accept the terms of agreement and stop the war, we're going to give Ukraine more than we've ever given it. We're going to arm it to the teeth. Well, I mean, in a sense, that's what should happen. But if he felt the need to base that on anything, he could base it on the Budapest Memorandum. Whether that's actually a reality, I mean, I don't think Zelensky is in the mood for a deal that provides Russia with any benefits of the incursion and even of Crimea. So
well, we are about to find out what would happen when Trump is in power, I believe, because it looks quite likely that Trump has a fair shot of being in power to resolve that mess, which is why I asked about what would happen if he had been, because we will get the answer to the latter one soon if we wait long enough, because Biden, let's face it, he can't find Ukraine on a map, and he's having conversations with people who've been dead for years, so he's not really in control of the situation. And look, this is not the first time that a superpower has breached a serious international convention. I mean, we had China take over Beijing well ahead of in breach of international laws that were surrounding that. So, not Beijing. Hong Kong. So as we know, these things are happening and these superpowers are taking liberties with these documents. Now, Ukraine, you point out, didn't break any of the conditions of the memorandum it signed, and it might not be a nation free of corruption, but if corruption is going to be the excuse that we use to validate invasion, then I've got some bad news for Europe, nearly the entirety of Africa, South America, most of Asia, a handful of Pacific islands, and I've never heard any commentator say, gee, Venezuela's really corrupt, they deserve to be annexed by America. So do you think this strange rhetoric that we use specifically against Ukraine regarding corruption has more to do with the domestic politics of the Democrats in America and disdain for that than a fair reality for the country itself?
Yes, I do. I think that, but I think there is also an overlay of sheer ignorance. There's ignorance about geopolitical realities in the region, and a real kind of absence of reality about Russia and about what it, why did the Biden administration not fully arm Ukraine from the very beginning, which would have shortened the war and stopped Russia? They didn't do that. They sort of piecemeal provided weapons, which is the worst way to help Ukraine. It prolonged the war and weakened Ukraine. Because even with what they were provided with, they were doing very well, thank you, against Russia for various reasons. So, no, I think you're right. I think corruption, it's very hard to assess corruption. I'm not in a position to do that, assess Ukraine's level of corruption these days. At this point in time, I know that there's been some action taken within Ukraine by Zelensky against corrupt people who've been caught. But as you say, I'm not sure if that really makes any kind of an argument for letting Russia.
I just find it extraordinary. That's the argument I hear is Ukraine is corrupt, therefore Russia deserves to invade. I mean, that is such a bizarre way to go about an argument for a geopolitical conflict. I don't see how that can apply only and solely to Ukraine. But I do have a final question here, Andrew. What do situations like this say about the sanctity of these agreements? I call them bits of paper because China broke a similar agreement, as I said, in Hong Kong. And look, if you look through history, we had the English and the French kings tearing up their agreements every afternoon. I mean, it's common that kings and emperors and presidents and prime ministers make these historical agreements. But when push comes to shove, when someone really wants something, they don't actually seem to be worth much at all.
It's window dressing at the time, and I think it's just basically made to look as though they're doing something. And it usually turns out that the one who breaches, not always, but the state that breaches these international agreements are the ones who should least be trusted. So, for example, on that basis, we could say, well, why is Russia still part of the United Nations Security Council? Why does it have veto power? It's broken laws that it shouldn't have broken. So, I mean, this is, bits of paper.
That's such a good question. Why does the virtuous UN allow Russia veto power when they're moralizing to Australia? Apparently, we're the greatest evil in the world, and they have absolutely nothing to say about the communist superpowers on that list. Do you find that a bit odd, a little bit depressing for world, coalitions that that's the state of the UN?
Yes, it's really, now that the truth is out about Russia and we know the truth about China, they should both be, well, I think that there should be a pop-up UN. Forget the existing UN, you can't reform it. So there should be a pop-up UN consisting of sovereign democratic states that have genuine democratic elections. They should be the ones that provide that kind of international oversight, if you like. It was meant to be a policeman on the international stage. And, I'd quite like to see that.
Yeah, so it was meant to be a protection against communist empires rising again, and yet here we are with the UN dominated by nothing but socialists and communists. I mean, it is a little bit of a... We need to take stock, let's say, of what we've got in place right now. But look, it's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you about history, Andrew. And also, where can people find you if they want to follow you or follow your books and support your work?
Well, I have a couple of blogs. The one that's most relevant to this conversation is pursuedemocracy.com. That's a blog which covers all kinds of issues to do with democracy. You can find me there.
And of course, you can always read Andrew in The Spectator. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Indeed. Thanks a million. Thanks a million.
And that's all from us today. Remember, you can catch up on previous episodes of this show or check out other shows on ADH by heading over to the website or downloading the ADH TV app at the App Store. And that's all from us today. Catch you next week.